Okay. Oh, okay. Emmanuel's here. All right. So we're live now. Okay. So Emmanuel will go first and then Tom. All righty. And Emmanuel's connecting. All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to welcome you to today's session. This is our last session. We're celebrating Nonprofit and Social Good Technology Month, and this is sponsored by Nonprofit Utopia, Whipfly, as well as Net Impact Chicago. So we spent the better part of this month focusing on ways that we could integrate technology into our day-to-day operations, whether you're a small business owner or you are a nonprofit. There was something to be learned in every session. We wanted to demystify technology and show people how to break down the silos between technology and the rest of the organizations. So we started off focusing on program design, and we looked at a couple of apps. We focused on Theory Maker, which helps people to take what they learn from theory of change and design those theories of change online. And we also had a demonstration of Dilomo, which helped people to design their program logic models. And you could take those drawings and then build out your program design. After that, we focused on ways that we can actually do accounting, cloud accounting, and we shared ways that you can not only do the cloud accounting, but look at ways to manage your programs and track your outcomes using dashboards within the Sage Intacct program. After that, we looked at managing teams remotely and project management. And then yesterday, well, 2 days ago, we focused on how you can develop your plans, your strategic plans, and make sure that you integrate technology into the strategic planning process rather than have the two separate. And today we're closing out, we're looking at risk management as well as disaster recovery and ways that, excuse me, ways that we can make sure that once disaster hits, as in COVID-19, we can fully recover from a technology perspective. So our guests for today are Emmanuel Jackson. Emmanuel is the CEO of Evanston Technology Partners. And we also have Tom Wolchinski. He is the director of Whipfly. We're going to start off with Emmanuel Jackson, and then we will hear from Tom. And Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining us. We'd like for you to come and tell us a little bit of information about yourself. Come to us in your own words. Give us a little background on yourself, Evanston Technology Partners, and then give us some pointers on risk management and all that good stuff.
Good morning, everybody. I guess I'm on the East Coast right now, so I apologize. I think who's out there that have reached out to me? Tom, please forgive me for not getting back with you yet. That's something that I normally get back to people really quickly, but I apologize. It's been very busy. I just finished a customer kickoff on a zero trust platform that we're working on. Well, my name is Emmanuel. Evanston Technology Partners. We are located on the south side of Chicago in the Bronzeville community. What we do, we are that wasn't me. Good. Okay.
No, it was me. I'm sorry.
No, I thought it was me. We are a cybersecurity services company. We have built a 27-seat, 24/7 SOC on the south side of Chicago. So we have a myriad of cybersecurity services that we deliver. A great deal is on the mitigation side, about what customers can do to create a stronger cybersecurity posture overall. And so I'm trying to get to make sure exactly, where you want me to go with this. What we find is that most cyber intrusions come through phishing and emails. The other thing that we see that it comes through is through the VoIP system, believe it or not, through the communications. We work a great deal within the healthcare sector, which has hundreds of disparate systems throughout their platform, and we find a lot of breaches happen through that aspect. So, the things that we work on and try to extend to customers, one of the things that we are 24/7, eyes on glass, but that's not enough. So anti-intrusion software, building policy and leadership within each organization becomes extensive and very important in the overall posture. We believe that cybersecurity and security within an organization is everyone's responsibility, and I think that's where leadership comes in, not just in the technology area, not just in a cybersecurity, but at the actual C-suite level. I think people look at outside sources as being the crust of the problem with cybersecurity. I can tell you, I dealt with one very large system in Detroit area. They got 30,000 employees, and the director told me, she said, "Hey, I'm not concerned about Russia or actually China. I'm concerned about these 30,000 employees who actually work for us, and what they do and what their habits are." So the first thing that I think is important in any organization is to build a cyber security awareness program where people are simply trained on what to do and what not to do. So security awareness training is very important. There are plenty of organizations like ours and others. I'm not trying to push ours, but anyone that you can use to begin to make that happen. So security awareness training, I think, is really number one to simply mitigate risk. I know there are some banks out there now. Believe it or not, banks have a three strikes you're out rule. I have a friend who worked at a major bank here in the Chicago area. An executive opened up his third phishing email, and I kind of felt bad for him because it cost him 90% of his bonus. Well, I knew how much her bonus was, so his bonus, it cost him around $150,000 for that one mistake. But I'm assuming that you can assume that he won't make that mistake again. I'm going to assume that he, without proper training, he will make that mistake again because he was kind of an old school banker where he's used to people opening his emails for them. But banks got rid of those type of support people a long time ago. So it is important that you mitigate risk from an organizational standpoint, from a high level standpoint, from employer to employee, to management, to your team, with comprehensive and periodic cybersecurity awareness training. Anything else in particular?
Yeah, so do you work with clients to help them actually develop those policies? I know you talked about putting policies in place, but do you help nonprofits and small business owners actually develop policies that they can share with their organizations so that they mitigate their risks?
That's interesting that you asked that. So I primarily, as a business, deal with large enterprises. So the SOC and things we do, folks who we're adding on as customers, work in large enterprises. Will we extend ourselves to smaller businesses? Will we extend ourselves to not-for-profits on a pro bono basis? If we believe in their vision, absolutely we will.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
So,
awesome.
so you can always give me a call to do that. We understand that budgets are actually stretched, but for us, this has been a very good period. COVID has been the best thing that ever happened to our business. Let me tell you, we are not complaining over here.
Oh, awesome, awesome. And if you were to give, I guess, a list of 5 do's and maybe 5 don'ts, what would you say the do's and don'ts are for cybersecurity?
Well, I think the clearly the do's is to have a zero trust platform within your organizations, and there are platforms like OutGuard, Palo Alto, and other people to work with you with that. If you can't afford your internal people, there are services and people that can help you, but when you hire those services and people, make sure that you clearly spell out the work that they're actually going to be doing, and really that is important. And once again, I think training your level of personnel, either it's 5 people or really 20 people. I think understanding what a security posture look like becomes very important. And I think the best do's in the world is to keep yourself updated. When you hire an organization, make sure you've involved yourself with an organization that can keep you updated. And part of this process, let me not forget this. It depends on the type of organization you have. So compliance is very important in this process. So if you are a small not-for-profit who works within the healthcare sector, that becomes very important. So you need to know that you are in compliance with HIPAA. You are compliant with anything to do with actually patient data, both on a state and actually federal level. That becomes very important because the penalties and the consequences for those types of breaches or non-compliance can be very expensive.
Okay, and my final question has to do with disaster recovery. Do you deal with disaster recovery at all?
That's very interesting. So we deal with the disaster recovery at a level of what we call IRS, which is a strange name for it, with actually an isolated recovery system. So we deal with mitigation as it relates to ransomware. And that we've done at a large enterprise level. And so, to be quite frank with you, that's not my level of expertise. I would have had Rasul Shabazz on the phone with you, who does most of that for us. And also the other thing that I missed out on was earlier is actually, make sure you have your annual penetration testing to make sure that, large breaches that have happened in our country so far, when Anthem was actually breached, those people were in that system for almost 2 years. And that breach ended up costing them $500 million. So that's can be pretty significant.
Okay, so when we talk about penetration testing, forgive me, I'm not a techie. What exactly is that? And I don't know that small enterprises have to worry about it so much, but what exactly is that, and how might one go about testing?
Well, it all depends on what you consider as a small enterprise, of course. We found that out through the PPP platform, that companies who have less than 500 employees is actually considered small. But that same company can do billions of dollars in that business. So, but I'm sure those are not the people that we're talking about. Right. But you hire a firm. What we do in the healthcare sector, we put sensors onto the network. We can do a threat analysis from that, and we can see if there can be quite a few vectors based upon how many servers, how many workstations you have, and we run a test of all of those things. And from there, we give you a report of breaches, possible breaches, and how you can improve your actual network.
Okay, yeah, that has been very, very helpful. Will you be able to stay on to the end in case there are questions of you?
I am in the car. I am moving it now, but I will be on.
Okay. All right.
I had to turn on the air conditioning because this heat in actually Atlanta is killing me.
Hotlanta.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us. And you know, hopefully there'll be questions of you at the end. We're going to bring on Tom Wachinski, and he will give us, you know, some some talk about, is it risk assessment we asked you to talk about, Tom?
Well, I'm gonna talk about managing cybersecurity risk.
Okay.
You know, so very similar to what Emmanuel was talking about. You know, I think that's my specialty at Wipfli, is helping organizations manage their technology risk. So we all implement various aspects of technology and computer systems to help us do our jobs. And by virtue of that, that exposes us to vulnerabilities, that there are bad actors out there that want to take advantage of that. And we need to be prepared and manage our risk because of that. So I'll talk through, you know, some of the trends in the industry and what we're actually seeing in the nonprofit space, and what some of our clients have had to deal with, and how we've had to help them recover. And then I'll talk through the elements of a cybersecurity risk management program. And that sounds daunting. And you know, I think there's a definite tendency to think that that's for the realm of the large enterprises, but there are some basic thought practices that are going to be beneficial to think through, and you know, you can scale it down and apply it to an organization of any size, because there are similarities. We all have data, you know, we all have methods of accessing that data, and our data has value to us. So that means it's got value to someone else as well. You know, either they can steal our data and resell it, or they can deny our access to our own data and derive compensation from that perspective. So we can think through those scenarios and make sure that we're planning for you know, appropriate defenses. I like to think of it, you've got two levers as an organization that you can work with. You can increase your resistance to attack, but that's not going to be good enough. You know, a couple of years ago, our industry shifted its perception. It's not about outright prevention anymore. You know, your defenses will always be compromised at some point. So the flip side of that, the other lever then, is how do you increase your resilience? And so how do you rapidly detect the bad things happening to make sure that you can recover from them? And I think that ties in directly to your comments, Valerie, around disaster recovery, and we can certainly, you know, work that into the conversation as well. And then I really liked your question. What are the five do's? Now I do have some slides I can share, and I'll turn those on here in a minute, and we can share those with the viewers. But I'll leave you with our last slide. I've got 5 things that you should take back to your organization and ask questions about this, and make sure you're doing these things, and be satisfied with what you're hearing from the folks responsible for IT. So let me share my screen here. All right. Hopefully you can see that, Valerie. You're muted, so give me, there's a nod, yeah. Big heads up. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Cool. So briefly, I'll just talk through the cybersecurity landscape in general, talk about some things that we've seen very recently in the non-for-profit space. COVID has thrown us all for a loop, and the bad guys have responded accordingly. You know, they're tracking with the organizational or the enterprise response to COVID, and they have shifted their attack patterns and behaviors. So it's worth having a little bit of discussion to understand the risks that our technology responses to a global pandemic have caused from a cybersecurity standpoint. And then I'll leave you with the cybersecurity risk management practices. The Verizon data breach investigation report recently came out for 2020. If you're in the cybersecurity industry, this is the Bible that really breaks down all of the published attacks across industries and helps us as practitioners understand how did they happen, what happened, what was the motivation, what was the dwell time, and helps us sharpen our defenses and the tools in our arsenal so we can be better able to anticipate and react to these in the future. So the stats I've got here on the bottom, I pulled out the data specifically related to the industry grouping that nonprofits and social good organizations fit into. In 81% of the attacks that were reported and studied by Verizon in this, the motive was stealing personal data from the organization. So whoever your customers or your clients are that you're working with, that data has value and it can be sold in the dark corners of the internet, and it's got value. So the bad guys out there, the cyber criminals and the hackers, were breaking into nonprofits in attempts to steal that organization or that data so they could monetize it and sell that elsewhere. 68% of the attacks involved an external threat actor. So there is an old adage in the cybersecurity business that it's the trusted insider who's going to harm the organization. That's certainly a perspective to consider, but the data shows, at least as it pertains to nonprofits, 68% of the attacks involved somebody from the outside of the organization. So that helps us think about what the attack vectors are that we need to protect against. The other really enlightening stat here was that in the incidents and the breaches of that personal data, 40% of the time it involved a compromised web application. So if the nonprofit organization had a web application where they were interacting with their clients in that space, if there was some misconfiguration, maybe some user credentials could be compromised, those web applications were abused and taken advantage of in 40% of the attacks. That was the highest, most frequent attack vector in the data set that Verizon collected. So if you have custom web apps, that's definitely something to think about, how that exposes your risk or extends your attack surface as an organization. Quick tie-in to one of Emmanuel's points here, talking about penetration testing, there's really three flavors of pen tests that we work with organizations. Well, you can call them four. We could do physical pen tests. Can we just break into an organization and gain access to physical assets or network jacks without authorization? Then there's the external penetration test, where we're going to try to break in to your network from outside the network, break in from an internal pen test standpoint. So we'll be that trusted insider, and we can start from the inside of the firewall. It's a very different attack. And then lastly, the fourth one is web apps. Web apps have vulnerabilities. There's a bunch of security risks out there. You need to evaluate those and make sure that they're secured, especially if you've developed something custom. Those security vulnerabilities, it take a lot of skill and engineering to make sure you're not introducing. So if it's a web app that somebody's developed as a side job, that's likely to have greater risk built into it. So that's something to consider from a pen testing standpoint, to understand, hey, what vulnerabilities do I have in this application and how easily can they be compromised? Looking across the industry, ransomware has been hugely prevalent. This has attacked all industries. The cyber criminals really don't care about this, but this is where a bad guy gets malware, specially designed malware on your computer. It encrypts the data, it spreads across the network, and it's attempting to deprive your ability to access your own data and they'll ask for a ransom, anticipating that you'll pay it in order to get the access to your data back. Ransomware has gotten really malicious. It's tough to detect, tough to prevent from getting into the network. And originally they would encrypt right away. Now they're hanging out for longer periods of time, so they can work their way into the backup cycle of the organization, and encrypt all the backups as well. Or if you restore from backup, re-encrypt everything at that point. It's really, really nasty stuff. It does constitute a HIPAA security breach as well, because these ransomware strains lately are not only encrypting your data, they're taking a copy of it, then they'll show you snapshots of your data, like a proof of life in a kidnapping scenario. Say, see, we do really have your data. Well, that's a data breach. That's an unauthorized disclosure, and if you've got HIPAA data, you've got to report that as well. Business email compromise and AP fraud has been a huge attack that's affected a lot of organizations that we work with, unfortunately. This is a letter that one of our clients got, directing them to change the payment information to a fake vendor, a real vendor, tricking somebody into paying to a fake account now. This happens through something called business email compromise. That there's two methods that occurs. Either somebody creates a copycat domain and email address. So, if you're not looking real close, it's going to appear similar. So they'll try to just trick somebody into believing a fake message. The more sophisticated attacks, they're actually breaking into someone's email account at one organization and then emailing that organization's customers and saying, hey, change your payment information. I could talk a lot more. We could spend the whole day talking about how this is actually happening. Some very recent examples that we've seen in cybersecurity incidents at nonprofit organizations. We've had to help a couple organizations recover through keystroke logging attacks. So in these cases, hackers were able to get access to install malicious software on the computers for the finance officials at these organizations. These key loggers just hang out in the background, and they copy every keystroke that you type on your keyboard. So if you go to chasebank.com and then there's a string of characters after that, well, chances are that was your username and password. And if that keylogger is capturing that, well, the bad guy now has your username and password. In a couple of instances, they were able to log into bank accounts for these organizations, initiate unauthorized wire transfers, and they wiped out the cash accounts for these organizations. Ransomware, very recently working with a tribal government, $500,000 was the ransom that the hackers asked for with this. So these are very large threats. They're very real, and they've got significant monetary impact on the organization. COVID caused unseen disruption in our work lives. We've never seen anything happen so completely and so rapidly before. And everybody had to go to a remote work arrangement nearly overnight. So what happened was we had this rapid adoption of remote work technologies. One stat I've got here, Microsoft had 70% growth in their Teams subscriptions within the first month of the work from home orders that we all had to deal with. 75 million daily active users, and that was just in March. It's continued to increase, I'm sure. The bad guys recognized, hey, we all switched to this work from home, and now we're using these other technologies that were implemented very quickly. So that just creates an opportunistic attack for these cyber criminals, and they started to phish people to see if they could get credentials to get into these systems. One study that we were paying attention to reported that there was a 667% increase in these phishing attacks. There were other alerts issued by Microsoft, as well as the federal government, 2 different agencies, talking about different impersonation and password spraying attacks where people were trying to gain unauthorized access to credentials and to be able to log into these systems. So it's just one example of how our reaction, from a technology standpoint, had you're squeezing the balloon. You push in one area to implement something, but it expands the attack surface greatly in another. Social engineering is the primary vector that we've seen a lot of these attacks, and this is where it's a non-technical hack, where we're trying to get you to do something other than you would normally do, and it's through a fake email or a phone call. When we're doing these testing with our clients, this was before work from home scenarios, we would do physical impersonations as well. We're borrowing these tactics from the bad guys, so it's all ways of using human interaction to get somebody to deviate from the security policy. And that's one of the reasons why Emmanuel talked about one of his dues was training your employees. You've got to be able, they're your front line of defense to detect and prevent these things from happening within the organization. There are unfortunately really weak passwords that are out there. And it's one of my big to-dos. It's number 1 on my list for security preparedness is make sure you've got multi-factor authentication in place, because that is the first line of defense against a password spray or a credential stuffing attack. I'll explain what both of those mean, Valerie. A password spray is using a easy to guess password against a known or suspected username. And you can do those in a very methodical, automated way where you can try to guess somebody's username and password. When we're doing pen tests on organizations and we're trying to break in, we have surprisingly high rates of success with variations of the company name, the season, and the year with an exclamation point at the end. It passes all the complexity rules that your password system is going to have, but they're really, really weak passwords and super easy to guess. So a password spray is going to target that specifically. Credential stuffing is reusing credentials. So LinkedIn got breached a couple of years ago. It might have been 3 years ago now. If you reused your same username and password from your LinkedIn account to some other account, well, the attackers were trying those and stuffing those credentials from one site into another site to see if they could gain access. Again, it's a surprisingly effective attack technique because people are lazy. And it's very difficult for us to remember complex passwords across 90 different online profiles that we all manage. So we reuse, it's human tendency. So the bad guys are taking advantage of that as well. So a multi-factor authentication approach, that's a combination. So it's something you have and something you know your password, and you're going to have your phone or the old RSID token that is going to have the one-time passcode that goes in as well. So that combination of those two factors effectively stops the password spray and a credential stuffing attack. So it's really important to have those in place. This box on the right, just some quick stats on some recent penetration tests. So this is one pen test we did very recently. We were able to crack 69% of the passwords in just over 6 hours. So we cracked nearly 5,500 passwords in less than a day of runtime for our password cracker. the vast majority of those were over 8 characters long, so people thought it was a long password. The number one password 1. I have no idea how that passed their complexity check. Clearly there's some work to do, but there were over 100 instances of people with that same password. So really, password strength is something that we all need to take seriously, even as end users, to make sure we've got stronger passwords to protect against people gaining unauthorized access. Here's seemingly complex passwords, but these are all things that we've cracked and been able to break in through breaking these passwords. Hopefully you can distribute these slides to people after the fact, but this is a pretty simple cartoon to explain a lot of complex math and how our password systems have gotten us to this point where they're incredibly hard for us to remember as people, but super easy for computers to guess and break. And so this is suggesting 4 random words, reasonably lengthy words, put together as one passphrase is significantly stronger than an 8-character complex password with substituted characters and punctuation marks. So the hard stuff for us to remember, there's a better way, and this explains it with 4 random words. That's a lot harder for the bad guys to guess and break into those passwords. So I want to get through this stuff quickly and make sure we've got some time for discussion here at the end too. I talked at the beginning about a cybersecurity risk management program where this seems like this is big complex work for large enterprises to undertake, but I think these concepts can be scaled down to nonprofits and smaller commercial organizations as well, where you need to understand your risk, and then you need to be able to have a governance process for how you intend to address that risk, and then procedures to control it and make sure you're preventing to an appropriate level, that you're detecting at an acceptable level. So you have to understand the nature of the information at risk. Do you have personally identifiable information for your clients? Do you have intellectual property? What is it that you're trying to protect? And that ties into the inherent risks. So how do I use that data? Do I exchange it with business partners? If I do exchange it with business partners, what's the vehicle? What's the medium? How do I move that data back and forth? Is it on the website? Is it over email? Do we use paper? Thinking through these different scenarios to understand how could this data be intercepted by somebody I don't want to have access, and how could it be used against me? So you need to understand those risks to help you define your program objectives and get to a point of defining very succinctly for your organization, what do you intend to achieve from a cybersecurity standpoint? Do you need to comply with regulations for data protection because you're working with clients in California, and now they have consumer protection acts in California that need to be adhered to? And so different objectives like that need to be defined for the organization. When you get those program objectives defined, now you need to get into how are you governing and making sure that those risks are addressed. So from an oversight standpoint, who's responsible for it? Who's doing the work to make sure it's adequately protected, and where does the buck stop? Who's got the executive responsibility to make sure that that's being done correctly? And what's the board level oversight look like? Ultimately, someone in an organization, regardless of size, is charged with governance. And what do they need to know about cybersecurity, and what are they responsible for as well? What are the communications? How are you going to communicate these things to the responsible parties to make sure that they know what your expectation of them to protect the organization, defend against these types of attacks, detect them from when they do occur. All of that drives the policy environment then, and that sets the tone for how we're going to protect the data in the environment. And there are a variety of technical and administrative safeguards that you need to get in place in order to meet that protection. And this is where you can work with firms like Wipfli or Evanston partners just to make sure you're doing it right, and then monitoring that to make sure. And Emmanuel, you said you guys have a SOC. Wipfli's got one. There's a variety of organizations that provide these monitoring services to really make sure you're able to identify deviations within your environment and respond accordingly. So Valerie, my 5 to-dos from a cybersecurity standpoint, I already talked about number 1. It's get multi-factor authentication in place, at least on every remote access method. If you can access a system from the internet, it's got to have multi-factor authentication on it. If you can't do multi-factor authentication, enhance your password strength. Don't reuse passwords. Make them complex, like we talked about a couple slides ago. Number 2, you need to have a real-time detection and response capability. And this is where I think it makes sense, especially at smaller organizations, to outsource it. There are companies that will work with you to be your managed cybersecurity provider and plug in those probes, monitor your network for you. This is extraordinarily difficult to do on your own, and you need economies of scale from a partner that specializes in an area like this. So this is definitely something to consider outsourcing. Isolate your backups. So this really ties into your comments, Valerie, around disaster recovery, and this is the foundation for a successful disaster recovery initiative. So an easy way to think about it is a 3-2-1 backup strategy. So it's 3 copies of your data on 2 different media types and 1 offsite location. So the 3 copies of your data, you've got production, that's number 1, and then you should have 2 different backup copies of that. And so that's your 3, and those 2 different backup mediums. So that's it could be a cloud service, and then it could be back up to a physical drive, and then you take that physical drive offsite, something like that, to keep it isolated. I've seen a lot of organizations. So this might border on getting too technical, but I think it's important to address, at least from a ransomware standpoint. The technologies for backup have gotten very sophisticated and fast, and it allows organizations to take a snapshot, take a picture of a computer, rather than reading the backup or reading the database and copying the data out specifically. So I've seen a lot of organizations just shift to, we're taking snapshots of all our computers, and that's our backup strategy. That's where I think you can get into trouble from a ransomware standpoint, because now you don't have just a copy of the data. You don't have the data that you can restore to a clean computer. You have to restore all these snapshots. If the ransomware is in every single copy of your snapshot that you have no hope of recovering. So you've got to think through, how do I want to back up my data separate from my programs, and make sure you've got that protection in place. Number 4, managing your vulnerabilities. Whether this is hardening systems, at a more technical level to resist some of the penetration testing and hacking activities, but the more basic stuff, keep your software current. Microsoft releases patches every month. Make sure you're applying those in your environment. If you've got other software that you use in your environment, make sure you're checking with the vendors and make sure you're applying those security patches on a regular basis. those security patches come out for a reason. It's because they've fixed flaws that have led to publicly available exploits that the bad guys are using against computer systems. So those patches are really an important element of making sure you've got a reasonable defense. And then the last one, I'll pile on with what Emmanuel was saying too. You've got to train your employees with that security awareness program. They're your front line of defense on this new world of social engineering attacks. So they need to know how to be skeptical. They need to know how to detect phishes, but more importantly, they need to know they're empowered to do that. That's their responsibility as an employee of the organization. And you know, I think if you have an example of somebody who spotted a phish and saved a data loss or a financial loss, that should be celebrated. Like, make an example out of that person in a good way to reward that good work that they're doing. Valerie, that ends my prepared remarks. So hopefully we hit the nail on the head with what you wanted to cover.
Oh, you did. I tell you, I had no idea there was so much involved in cybersecurity. I'm glad you guys took the time to go over this. I had a few questions, and then I wanted to open it up to others in the event that they had questions. For you personally, what has your training been? I'm just amazed that you're I guess you're speaking like a really, like somebody who might have been trained by the FBI or something.
Thank you, I think.
yeah, that's a compliment.
So I've always been I've always been in professional services.
Okay.
And I've always been on the side of how do you operationalize systems to be used within organizations. And very early on in my career, I just happened to be part of a project team at a global oil company. And we were changing the way that they were doing e-commerce. And it was the pilot program for e-commerce at a multi-billion-dollar multinational oil company. When you make the kind of money they do, they take it very seriously and they want to protect it. So there was this huge security hurdle that we had to get through. And my role was to be the liaison between our development team and their security team and understand their concerns and make sure that we were able to address them from a technical standpoint and then demonstrate it. So very early on, I got into this cybersecurity space in terms of securing new stuff and making sure it was defensible. And then moved into this CPA firm landscape where I've been always involved with IT process assurance and how do you demonstrate that you have, we refer to it as CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. I've spent the past 17 years focused on helping organizations increase their performance in managing CIA.
Oh, okay. And then I guess another question that went through my mind as you were talking, in the event that you find yourself, in the middle of a data breach or something like that, I mean, that's obviously a federal crime. Who do you report this stuff to, I guess, as a crime?
Yeah. So it's the FBI. I mean, that's where the place to start is. There's the IC3, the Internet Cybercrime Complaint Center. You can find that online. That's probably the easiest way to submit, here's something that I think is happening. Ideally, you have cyber liability insurance. and you're working with your insurance company, and they might have a breach specialist that they'll detach to you to help through the claim. They may say, hey, this is something that rises to the level of an investigation. There's a backlog of stuff there. It's got to be, it's got to be pretty interesting right now to get a quick response from the FBI. But those breach specialists can help you figure that out too.
Okay, and you mentioned Password Cracker. Is that software that you guys develop on a proprietary basis, or is there some vendor that anyone can go to get it?
So as bad and scary as the bad guy community is, there's a good guy community that's working just as hard, and they share everything in the public domain about these security testing tools. So you've got bad guys developing for nefarious purposes, and you've got good guys developing, for good, and they're sharing these. So our password crackers are all taken from this open source community, and then we've got purpose-built hardware that we're using to run this open source software on to crack passwords.
Okay. Yeah, I got another question, but I can't read my writing. I was writing so fast. So you're spared that question. I don't have time to decipher what I wrote, but this has been very, very helpful. I'm wondering if anybody else on the Zoom call has any questions.
I have some questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay. So you were talking about Office 365 and risks with that. The other really big software programs that nonprofits use are G Suite, and then pretty much everyone uses like a QuickBooks or something like that. So are there specific risks to be aware of just with other types of programs that people commonly use?
Yeah, I think G Suite has got the same. I can't even call it a design flaw. It's got the same inherent vulnerabilities. You're accessing it over the internet. Anything you can access over the internet, you've got to think through, how do I keep the bad guys out? And G Suite's got all the multi-factor authentication stuff built into it. Certainly something that you need to evaluate, what's the best way to enable that in your environment. I can't speak to the various commercial accounting platforms that are out there, but I do know, you mentioned QuickBooks. There's QuickBooks Online. I just don't know what their multi-factor authentication process is. I don't know what that is, but certainly something to consider. If it's a subscription service and you access it through a web browser on the internet, you've got to think through, how do you get multi-factor authentication in place?
Okay. And my question was differences in concerns for people that run their organizations off of Mac, Apple products versus, or like Google products versus Microsoft Office or Microsoft products.
So I'll address the first part, Mac versus Windows. There used to be an argument that nobody develops malware for Mac. That has been debunked routinely. I think Mac is just as rich a target environment as a Windows environment. So I don't personally believe Mac is more secure because nobody's developing malware for it. It's got vulnerabilities and people will go after it just like Windows. And then Microsoft versus Google, I don't have a comment on the security features of either. I think there's my personal belief here. The more you pay for a product, the more there's resources available at that vendor to put into security engineering. And Microsoft has got a very different approach to commercializing software than Google does. That doesn't mean one's more secure or less secure than the other, but there are differences in their approach for how they're securing data. And when you're not paying for a service with dollars, you're paying for it by you're trading off, you know, the service provider's use of your data. They're getting paid another way. So there's just a different security risk that you need to think through.
Okay, thank you.
You're muted, Valerie.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, this question is for both you and Emmanuel, and I guess you can answer first, Tom, since Emmanuel is muted. This will give him time to get unmuted. Do you ever work with clients to help them to develop a checklist of things that they need to look for, and then develop policies? Because you talked about governance. So do you help them develop internal policies that they can have on hand?
We do. We have a policy library that we can make available on a subscription basis to organizations. And we do that very specifically in the nonprofit space. It's a jump start. Let's get you some policy templates and examples that you can start with and adapt to make your own. We also work with, we can do health checks to take a look at what's the current state of the environment, and are there certain areas that are operating at a lower level of proficiency, and where do you need to spend some time and efforts to increase that proficiency as an organization.
Okay. And Emmanuel, is that something that you guys work with your larger healthcare organizations? And I think Emmanuel indicated that he was driving, so he might not be able to respond. And then finally, Tom, you mentioned that you want me to share the slide deck. I will share any slide deck. I'm going to also share this video. If there are any other resources or links to resources you want to share, I can add that too. Hopefully by the end of next week, I will be compiling all of these videos that we've had for the month and putting together a toolkit with, bios with these videos and any other handouts that you guys want to share. So I'll be sending that out. So anytime between now and say next Wednesday, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll make sure you get a copy of the slides we've shared today.
Okay, awesome. I really, really appreciate it. And George, I always put you on the spot, so it should be to a point where it's no longer on the spot.
I'm expecting it, right?
Right.
I'm expecting it.
Yeah.
No, as always, I just wanted to thank the speakers today for their support and expertise here on this presentation. And then you, Valerie, again, kudos to you for coordinating and putting this technology month together and getting Whitfully involved. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with you and to bring value to the nonprofit world. So we really hope that everyone was able to get a lot of insight and value to take back to their organizations to help them improve, but also not be afraid to ask for help, right? That's why we're here. So, we're all here to support you all and help you all in achieving your mission and being successful and managing your risk at the same time. But really at the end of the day, the way I look at it is like there's three pieces to the overall formula for success, for having a successful organization, and it's having really good people, efficient processes, and effective technology. And I think if you have that formula in place, you can go anywhere with that and make a real big impact. So again, happy to be involved here with you, Valerie, and Net Impact Chicago as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And another person who's been extremely helpful has been Linda Stetler. Linda, did you have anything that you wanted to contribute?
I just want to say that I think both of these speakers were great, fantastic, and just full of really good information that will be useful to a lot of people. I don't know. I think it's been a really good month, Valerie. I think it's been a really good series of presentations.
I think so too, and I thank you for being one of those wonderful presenters. And I can honestly say that the month has far exceeded my expectations. So I'm happy.
Yeah, and so, you know, the one thing is I just waited too long so I wasn't able to participate in Tuesday's round of panel discussions. So I'm going to be waiting for the video of that one. But, you know, Eli participated in that, and, you know, he is definitely also, you know, somebody that helped tremendously in getting all of this together.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we had to thank Eli. Eli brought George and Whipfley and Tom and all these folks. It's like Eli begat George, George begat Tom. But I can't say thank you enough. And we're about 2 minutes over, so I won't hold you. And I will definitely be following up. All righty.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Everybody have a great day.
Okay.
Be well. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.